Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a podcast brought to you by the Digital Marketing Institute. I'm your host for this episode, Emma Prunty, and I'm very excited to have the chance to be behind the mic today for once. I produced the show with our wonderful host, Will Francis, but we agreed I'd try out the seat today as I'm especially interested in this topic, AI and content, including copywriting, ethics, bias, and more. To discuss all these with me today, I'm delighted to have Julie Atherton and Kerry Harrison. Julie is an award-winning digital strategist, business leader, public speaker, and consultant. Through her social media and marketing consultancy, Small Wonder, she trains and advises organizations across sectors on how to embed social media in their strategic development and growth. She is also a DMI subject matter expert and the author of 2 textbooks, Social Media Strategy, which is now in its 2nd edition, and B2B Social Selling Strategy. Kerry Harrison is an AI educator and copywriter, specializing in using artificial intelligence to augment human creativity. Over the last 5 years, she has co-created the world's first AI gin, crafted an AI Queen speech for Wired magazine, brought the award-winning Cheltenham Science Festival AI curator to life, and has spoken about AI nationally and internationally. She's won 2 DMA awards for best use of AI and is the course director of the AI Copywriting Masterclass at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Julie and Kerry, you're so welcome to the podcast today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Yes, indeed. So I'm just going to jump right in and talk about this. AI is something we've been looking at, of course, all of us in the marketing area, education on our side. We recently launched an AI short course, which is proving to be very useful for people. And it's just so interesting at this point to see where AI is in terms of reaching into every corner of marketing, in particular SEO. But I think a big issue is content and where we are with ChatGPT in particular, and how ChatGPT and others have really taken the public imagination. So let me ask you both, maybe starting with Julie, are you feeling generally positive or more anxious about AI and content or copywriting at the moment?
Well, so I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's really hard to say yes or no, like I feel positive or negative. I think it's a bit like the internet and social media, which are incredibly powerful, empowering, and really level the playing field for access for everybody to be able to do things that they perhaps wouldn't have been able to afford to or be able to do before. And that is fantastic. But like those places, there is the opportunity to behave badly and to behave unethically and to do things that aren't very pleasant in those spaces. And I think that can be quite unnerving. And so what we need to do is we need to try and, as a society, move forward, embracing this technology positively and using it in a good way, and maybe having some methods, some processes, some rules, I don't know whether that's even possible, about how we decide to police it, or perhaps to be more careful in the way we implement it than we perhaps did, social tech, which has been quite scary in lots of ways. So I think, yes, I'm excited by it, but I'm also cognizant that there's a whole minefield that brands are going to have to navigate, but we as individuals are also going to have to navigate.
Mm-hmm. And Kerry, you've been involved in educating people in AI for actually quite a number of years already. So you've quite a strong background here.
Yeah, I think I agree with Julie. It's really difficult to say it's amazing or it's terrible. I think there's a lot that we need to do in terms of regulation and, as Julie said, managing it. I think educating it, from my point of view, is really important, helping people to understand it, how it works, and not just to showcase all the wonderful things it can do, but actually to talk about the issues, the pitfalls, the problems, the wider societal implications. So I think for me, I'm excited about it, but I also struggle a little bit as a creative. And I've gone through this whole journey over the last year or so with AI when ChatGPT emerged at the back end of 2022, just being absolutely terrified, because until that point, the last 5 years, I remember people saying to me in early sort of 2019, 2020, are you worried about your copywriting role? And I just remember saying, oh, gosh, no, the AI generated content is terrible. And then ChatGPT arrived and it was like, oh, this is a whole different ball game. And I went through this period of time where I thought, well, I just, that's kind of it for me as a copywriter. And I think the more I've used it and implemented it, and I used it over the course of a year in pretty much every job I did, not necessarily on live on the copy, but on another screen, just to test to see, what can AI do on these jobs. And I think I've realized over that time that there's still a huge need for human writers, for human creativity, for human thought and strategy, and to come to these models with our own objectives and our own ideas. And so I feel quite sad in a way that AI could potentially take some of that away. I also run an AI writers meetup. So last year I ran an AI writers meetup and we met up every month. And there were people in that who were doing sort of very straightforward content whose clients had already said to them, actually, we're going to go with ChatGPT on this. Rather, and they'd lost clients already. And so I think that's a terrible shame. I feel sad that AI is getting so good at writing, because there's something so beautiful about the craft. But yes, there's also a lot of benefits. It can help us save time and, lots of research. So there's definitely good and bad, from my point of view anyway.
Do you not think, though, that I'm a strategist rather than a writer, although I have written books, obviously, but, I don't write marketing content in the same way that Kerry does. But as a strategist, we used to have to spend so much time to find insight, to dig around and find all the insight. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly we've got the internet and we've got access to people through, social channels or immediate sort of meetups and, groups like this or Zoom. And suddenly you can drill out all of that information much more easily, but you still have to create the strategy yourself. You still have to, from your own lived experience, your background, who you are, and your own intellect, come up with what that strategy is going to be and match the problem to a real solution. And I think that is what great writing is about, and the fun bit in writing. And I think that, like Kerry's saying, that's going to stay. I think maybe what's going to happen is the boring stuff, like, writing an SEO blog or kind of, just sort of even maybe doing the fact checking could be done by the AI. But we need to kind of still make sure we're giving the time to come up with those great ideas, because I don't think that's going to come from AI, not in the soon, immediate future anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have this methodology called the AI sandwich, which I know is not a very glamorous name, but it's essentially the idea that we need the human to do the sort of strategy and the thinking and the objectives and the concepts. And then we have the AI in the middle. That's the kind of filling. And that's where we use the tools. And then we have the craft and the human afterwards. So I think over the course of this year, since doing this work, I've realized we need the human before. It's just exactly as Julie was saying. And yes, AI can support us with research and pulling out insights, but we need to approach these tools with an objective or a kind of idea of where we want them to take us. And then when we've got the output, to make it as strong as possible with our own human intelligence afterwards. So that's how I think it works. And also actually just mastering the art of prompting. Is also, we have to learn that as humans. We need to make a call on, what prompt do I use here? What technique am I doing? What do I need to bring into this prompt to make the output as effective as possible? So there's still a lot of human necessary, I think, in these processes.
Well, I suppose you're already there, Kerry, but, are you going to end up with people who are great writers and great creatives still, but they are able to manipulate these environments, these tools, really effectively to help their creativity, rather than compartmentalizing, this stuff's done by AI, this stuff's done by a person. Actually, the skill set that people need to have is to be able to incorporate those tools into their work.
Yeah, I think so. I think that AI will divide in some way. I think that brands and businesses that maybe just need to get content out quickly, that are not massively like in love with the writing and the craft, then AI will actually do a pretty good job. I always say that AI writing is fine. It's fine. But if you want more than fine, then you need a human. And I think there'll be copywriters that take on more of an editing role. So I already know copywriters who've done that, whose clients have said, I've written this for ChatGPT, can you make it sound nice? So I think there'll be that. I think there'll be also writers, and I know already there's also agencies doing the same, who will just be 100% human, who will actually reject the AI writing tools and say, we are 100% human. Everything will be crafted. Every word will be handpicked and chosen, beautiful writing. And then I think there'll be the collaboration, which is kind of where I am. And I have debated. I went through this kind of period of time where I thought, do you know what? Do I just need to go 100% human? Because I'm not sure actually I want to stop writing in the way that I've been writing. But then what I thought was that was, in a way, from my point of view, a bit of a crazy stance, because I think these tools are here, and whether we like it or not, they are not going anywhere. And so for me, I felt like actually what would be better to do, rather than reject it, although I understand why people are doing that, is to actually embrace the tools and learn how to use them really, really well. And I think in a way that will also separate us. So our craft will separate us from the people that just want to bang out content with a single prompt. So our craft is important, but also our ability to use the tools well will also separate us, because if we know that and master it and know how to use them, then the output that we get is going to be of better quality than a single zero shot prompt, and then the craft as well. So I think it could go. I think there'll be different people that want to use it really, really time saving. Let's get it out quickly. People who just want beautiful, beautiful craft somewhere in the middle, which is where I sit. So yeah.
It does depend a lot on the clients, doesn't it, and who you're working for, and how much value they put, how much money they've got, how much value they put in it, right? Mm-hmm. So, you could even argue that this is not a new problem. Like, copywriters have always faced, a cheaper version who can produce something faster, or in my case, I've worked a lot in translation. And, Google Translate's been around quite a long time, and similar translation tools, translation memories. And, I worked in Italy translating from Italian into English, and very often they're happy with whatever gets produced quickly, and they don't care about the quality. Whereas I would be pulled in by well-meaning clients who wanted to improve it and make sure it was proper. So, like, it's a never-ending discussion in the content world of quality, and how much value you put on quality, and how you recognize quality. Not every client might recognize the value in that. So I think that's this is just amplifying it now and making it more accessible to more people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's interesting you say about this almost assessing the AI output, because I think that's also another job for writers, a human writer. Because I've been working on copywriting for 20 years, when the AI generates something, I can actually assess it pretty well. I'm like, I know if it's good or not good. And so that's another thing, isn't it? That although anyone can now write, and you can create a blog very quickly, even if you're not a skilled writer, but you might not necessarily know what's good and bad, and whether it will, really resonate with an audience, or whether it's compelling, or whether it will, there's emotional triggers that will help people to engage. So there is something in that as well. I had like 6 months of one-to-one training with a senior writer. I was in the office all the time around senior writers who helped me and pointed out, what I could do to make things better. And I don't know whether that's something that will be, I guess that's changed quite a lot now. But having said that, although up and coming writers may not necessarily have that one-to-one element or learn the craft in that way, I think they will just adopt these tools like they were, it's totally normal. It's just part of their job now. And so it'll be really interesting to see how young up and coming writers are just using it like we use Word. It would just be, it's just what we do.
Word and the occasional spell check, which we've been using for a number of years, right? And Grammarly and so on. I was going to ask, though, some people might argue that a tool like this can help people learn better. They might actually improve their writing. They might realize what they had been doing wrong. It does have potential, to do that for people. And I'm thinking of college students who, really need help with their essay. Not the different institutes have different regulations about this, but there is some element of improving the overall standard potentially.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in terms of improving the writing, that I do sometimes use AI models to say, give it something and say, how could I improve it? Or suggest 5 ways to improve this copy. So you can almost use it like a writing coach in some ways, which is quite helpful. So yeah, I see what you're saying.
Julie?
I was thinking about just the fact that if we're thinking about content as well, that writing isn't just about writing for what we're going to read, but also writing for voice and video content as well, but particularly voice. I think I've been messing around with ChatGPT on my phone, and so you ask it stuff and it just speak it, and then it comes back and it tells it, you can pick which voice you want for it to respond in, and then it's talking back at you. And I've been really intrigued by that, because as a brand, obviously you could pick your own voice that you wanted to have for your brand, to have real conversations with people. And also there's a sense of authority and truth when you hear it being spoken, which is much more convincing than when you see something written. Because sometimes you look at it when it's written and you think, that's a bit clunky. But actually, when somebody's it's got all these ums and ers in it as well when it's responding, probably just as many as I use. And so, that feels very authentic. So I think there's something interesting about different ways we produce content now, and how AI is changing that, but also how a writer would, actually do that content in real time in a way that these tools will be able to do. So I think we have got to embrace it, because it's kind of is going to make things happen, but it's tricky to see how you control it.
I think the volume is so much greater now. Over the last few years, the volume of marketing content is just increasing so much. So, for example, this one podcast, we'll produce a blog post from it and take video snippets from it. And there's an efficiency issue there. So if you're not using tools that help you be more efficient with your content, maybe you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. And I think also, we were talking earlier about, this move away from SEO with Google. Actually, that is allegedly about quality, isn't it? About authority, about having better content rather than having all those keywords in that content. And so in some ways, if we can produce more intuitive content that's responding to what people are wanting in that moment, and these tools help us do that, then that's a positive thing or a useful thing for a brand.
I think the time-saving thing, it definitely does save time. There's quite a lot of upfront work in things like managing the prompts and understanding the prompts, but once you've got that, you can get to an output much better. And that's one of the reasons that I was saying I had this debate about whether to go 100% human or not. This is why, in a way, that I decided to embrace the tools, because I know that other people will be using them, and it can help us to save time and stay, not even massively boost our productivity, because I still do craft. But it just does, it saves me time and keeps me efficient in a way that if I was 100% human, I just wouldn't be able to do. And just on one thing that, Julie, you were talking about the authority of the chatbots. I think that for me, the authority and this kind of authoritative way they deliver their replies or their answers, I think is also slightly unnerving, because it's so easy. And I think when you see it in written, I don't know, because it's written so authoritatively, you believe it. And the thing is that these models often hallucinate, often come back with things that sound very viable, but are not actually correct. And I think that's the danger. And I think that would be even stronger with a voice, because when a voice comes back, I don't know, there's this real element of truth when someone says something. And I wonder, it because you haven't almost got that time to analyze text, whether it would just feel so like the answer, even if it's completely made up. And I think that's a real danger. One thing that some of the tools are now introducing, so the Google Gemini, sorry, I'm just, because it recently changed from Bard to Gemini. So Google Gemini have now got a little tool. So when you generate copy, there's a little G button, a little Google button that you can press, and it will then highlight certain elements of the text with search results so that you can actually cross-reference, and so you know that it's not hallucinated, which I thought was that's the first thing I've seen where I can actually cross-reference the output and then just see live resource, live online search, and go, okay, so that's where, I mean, it's not come from that per se, but I can cross-reference it, and I think that's quite helpful. There is definitely some need for us to have those kind of ability to check within the tools and the models. I also think that I said today, actually last week in my newsletter, that I worry that because it's so easy now to have information that's not true, and especially with this arrival of Sora, the OpenAI's video, I don't know if you've seen it, but OpenAI's they've just released it to a very small group of people, but it looks incredibly realistic. And I just think the more we see of AI imagery, AI video, text, I think it's going to come to the stage where we will have to just presume that everything that we see is fake unless we do the digging. And that's where I'm worried that we'll get to, because we just won't know what is real and what isn't real, because it's just getting so realistic looking. And I just feel like that would be incredibly stressful, especially for young people, to go, okay, every time I see an image or a video, how do I know it's not AI generated? And then have to check it. I just think it would be incredibly stressful.
I find that issue really interesting, because we've kind of been saying that for a few years, though. Like, there were deep fakes and everything in the last US election, right? And also even just manipulation of video and cutting out elements of Joe Biden stumbling off stairs, whatever it might be. There's always been that kind of manipulation / propaganda, if you like. Maybe we're never ever going to get to that final, complete, convincing. I mean, I know the latest Sora, it was interesting looking at that during the week, because people were picking out the obvious glitch in the cat on the pillow, where the cat's got one extra leg. So, there's great fun to be had in actually spotting these. But just to roll back for a second, I think if we could just explain for the audience, in case they're not sure, about hallucination and what hallucination means in this context.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so hallucination is a term used for where the model's generated something that isn't factually correct. So because the models are trained to be as helpful as possible, if you ask it something and it hasn't got the capacity to deliver a reply that matches that, it will still deliver something. And so you often get results that aren't factually correct. I mean, I say often, you can get back results that are not factually correct, and that's been labelled as a hallucination. And actually last year it was I can't remember which dictionary it was, but it was their word of the year was hallucination in terms of AI hallucination. So it's interesting how that is filtered into the public consciousness so much that was word of the year last year. But I don't know if it was, I think it might be in Collins or one of the dictionaries. So hallucination is
Julie, were you going to add to that?
No, sounds like a great definition.
Okay. No, that's great. I think I'm losing my train of thought here. The whole area of regulations is something that is also just being discussed over and over again, isn't it? It's really hard to know. I mean, it's been almost a year, hasn't it? Been a year almost since all those academics got together with their big letter worrying about the future of AI not being regulated. And I don't know what's happened. There's been a summit in the UK. I don't know where that got to, and what's happening in the US. Not much. people are suing on an individual basis. OpenAI, for example, the New York Times. But even that story is interesting because I think in the last week, it's been revealed that possibly they kind of went out of their way to hack into to make that look like it was happening, like they were prompting it in a certain way to make it look like their articles behind the paywall were being attacked. So it's also vague and fudgy. I don't know how anyone's going to regulate this. It's quite scary. And it's not just the UK and the US this year that have elections. Apparently, it's the busiest year ever worldwide for elections. So many countries in the world are affected by this.
It's going to be mayhem then. Yeah. I think this thing about copyright, isn't it? So, I've just finished second edition back end of last year of my social media strategy book. And I finished it. And then somebody said to me, "Oh, could you have done it with AI?" And I felt like weeping because I obviously didn't do it with AI. I just did it all the hard way. And I was like, "No, I don't think so. Like, I really hope not anyway, after all that effort." But the reality is then you put that out there, and what's to stop anyone just taking that content and using it to train a model, all of those things. It's very difficult to control that, and as an individual author, there's absolutely no way that you'd have the clout to be able to take on these organizations or even, just small entrepreneurial startups who start messing around with it. And even as publishers, I publish through Code and Page. I have no idea, what they would do in that circumstance. I think we're waiting. Everyone seems to be waiting for some sort of regulation, but it's so complex. And so there's no boundaries. And how do you pin down what it's actually doing in legalese in a lot of ways? Because, this is so all encompassing, isn't it? From voice to text to video to imagery, it covers everything, doesn't it, that we create? But I was looking, at some kind of content creation things the other week. And it's interesting that although lots of businesses, Kerry's talking about agencies, perhaps using 100% AI, or people, like for simple copy things that they feel like they'd be happy just doing it all on AI. Organizations can see we might be able to save money, we might be able to improve productivity, we might be able to do all these things. Therefore, it's quite tempting. But when you ask the public, they don't really like content to have been created by AI. So that the lag between, what businesses might find, expedient to do and how the general public feel when they're on the receiving end of that type of content, certainly when it's not transparent, is really interesting. And I think brands like copywriters themselves probably need to decide, what is it that we want to do? Do we want to embrace this and use it, or are we going to say, no, we're not going to use it, and this is the reason why, or we're going to use it but only in these ways? Because I think we might find that a bit like, sustainability and environmentalism, we're looking to brands to do that because the governments and the legislators are too far behind, and therefore we're expecting those brands to start to put a line in the sand and say what they're going to do.
Are you thinking of brands who are being transparent and having a sort of AI policy at the bottom of their page saying we acknowledge where we use AI, or particularly if it's a media outlet?
And maybe even
how do you feel about that whole embracing of it? And is it good or bad for a brand if they are found out if they're using it and people didn't like that?
I think that you need to have a position on it because I think if you are pretending, certainly if we think about channels like social media channels, if you're pretending that content is user generated, or you're pretending that, or you're implying that content is from a expert or an authority, and actually it's not, it's AI, then I think you lose credibility in terms of that relationship with your audience and all of those that trust that you're trying to build up. However, there's no problem with having an AI, expert or for using it. We're very comfortable with AI influencers, aren't we? They've existed for a long time, and some of them have got some of the biggest followings in the world, and they work for brands. So we're comfortable with it, I think, as long as it's transparent. But we're not for Taylor. Yeah, so I think AI influencers like Lil McCara, or like the KFC Colonel Saunders, they do. People don't mind about them as long as they know, but as a brand, you have to be really clear. And I think the other thing is, what are your values as a brand? What do you stand for? You think about Dove with all their call out stuff they did about beauty filters. For them, I don't think they would ever be able to have an AI influencer. Because they're all about the real woman, aren't they? The real body. It doesn't matter what you look like. And actually, it would be very wrong for them to go out in that way with, we feel very uncomfortable with that, whereas we might be happier with another type of brand going down that route.
But what if Dove were using AI in producing content, other content, blog content, more static?
I would say to do what?
Written content, voice content.
Yeah, if they're trying to make people look a bit prettier and airbrush out things in their imagery, then we'd all have a bit of a problem with that, wouldn't we? But come up with creative ideas, maybe that's fine. So it's a different thing. What do you think, Kerry?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of torn on it, because I wonder if maybe, I think you need to be. I think at this point in time, we need to be transparent. So if I use AI in my work, I ask my client first if they're happy for me to use it, because I have trusted relationships with my clients, and I don't want to ever jeopardize that. And I also want them to know how I'm using it. So if I am using AI, we'll have a conversation about it and say, I'll probably use it for research and maybe some starting points, but I'll always craft everything by hand, once it's generated. So I can have that conversation, so they know, even if I have used AI, that I've also spent a great deal of time on making it sound right. I think as we go forward, if these tools become much more integrated into workflows and the way that we work, I don't know how easy that will be, and I wonder if it will just come down to the quality of the work, and whether it's AI generated or whether it's human, and it's probably human crafted. I just think people will pay for what they get, the quality that they get. So I think that, because it's a bit like, I suppose, Photoshop, came in and changed the way that designers are working, but no one designer kind of said, oh well, I just want to let you know that I'm not using it. Like, it's just such a normal part of life now. So it would be interesting. So, but I do think at this point in time, while AI is not regulated, we've got no things like watermarks are potentially going to be a thing, so that people can clearly see this is AI generated content. Things like, they're also talking about watermarks on things like videos and images, so it's very clear that what we're watching is AI generated. All of those things, but until that point, I personally, as a freelance writer, feel that I need to be fully transparent with my clients. And also because it's quite important for them to know how they can use it, how it works. What, a lot of people are interested and go, oh, wow, tell me all about it. Can you highlight the bits that you've, that are AI generated, so I know? And it might be a sense of, this was the first draft and this is what I've done to it. So there's also that kind of transparency, being very open, and maybe, highlighting certain elements that were AI and how you contributed. I don't know, because it's so new, there's so many different ways it can go.
Yeah. So would you ever imagine having a client, say a new client that you're yet to meet, could you imagine a client saying, no, we're not happy with it, we want you to be 100% human in our work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally think that, and I've got no issue with that, and I think people are within their rights to say that, and people that really value the craft and are happy to pay for it, because this, a lot of it will come down to how much people are willing to pay. Because if you pay for a copywriter to craft things from scratch without using any AI support at all, you're going to have to pay more because it's going to take longer. That's just the way it works. And I'd be very happy for clients to say to me, to be fair, a lot of the jobs I do are 100% human anyway, just because I just don't think that AI can support me in certain tasks, anything conceptual, things like headlines or coming up with ideas for campaigns. It just can't do that. So a lot of my work's still 100%. And I think it's, I'd actually welcome clients sometimes just saying, please don't use any AI. I'm like, great, I can just be 100% human, 100% craft, like pick every single word, do all of the research, like throw myself 100% into this job. And that's wonderful for me. But then I also think if they do want to use AI, I'm going to be really open about the way I'm using it.
And the people that you're training, those who come on your workshops and your talks, and you've mentioned a few of them have been let go essentially from their copywriting jobs. Like where do they go next? Or what do you advise to people who have their job threatened in that way?
Yeah, I mean, the people that not necessarily in the meetups that I did. So these were writers, copywriters, and it would only be like one job that had gone. They still had other clients. There's one lady said that one of her clients was now using it and she was become an editor on it. So it didn't get the impression that people were losing everything. It was just the odd job here and there, but they were still very much doing the copywriting. So, but I think it was just a bit shocking for me to hear that already, that's become a thing. And interestingly, the one who talked about losing some of their work, a lot of it was around translation, actually, which you mentioned earlier. And it depends on the type of content, but most people I speak to, the writers at the moment, are still doing pretty much everything 100%, or just gently tinkering with it and seeing how it can support them.
Like, I do think that it still does take quite a lot of time, doesn't it? So there's an impression that perhaps it is really, really quick to do, but to get high quality, it's still going to take time, because you're not going to get a first draft that's going to be okay. You are going to have to really make sure you've got those prompts right, and that you've got that target audience sorted, and the brand voices right, and all of those kind of things. And therefore, ultimately, sometimes we might make decisions as organizations to say, oh, well, we can really ramp up our content creation and we can do more, but actually we might end up with a lot more, but it might not be very good unless we still put the time in to do it well. And these are a bit like you say, Photoshop. Photoshop doesn't actually make it take any less time, I think, to get a good piece of creative work, because you can spend a lot of time then perfecting something that you wouldn't have been able to do pre-Photoshop. So I think we do have to be careful that we don't, think it's an answer to everything. And because there's so many different tools, which ones are we going to use, and making decisions and what to invest in and which to learn how to really get the most out of, or do we have to have more than one? That can still increase costs as well as time. So I think we do have to be careful about just assuming it's all sort of gravy, because I don't think it is.
Yeah, I totally agree that I think a lot of people think that AI is a silver bullet, but actually, definitely in the initial stages of learning the tools, it does take longer. Sometimes it's quicker for me just to go 100% human on it. And it's also knowing it's having the time and investing the time in understanding the tools and how they work. I know, for example, if it's conceptual, I don't even touch AI. But, if it's getting a rough idea or a first draft or for a blog, it's probably worth investing in the time in the AI tools. Then there's also the thing of there's so many AI tools, like, for example, ChatGPT is great for strategic sort of insights. It's really good for things like structuring. And then you've got things like the Google tools are really good for research. You've got Copilot, Microsoft Copilot's really good for research. Claude is another one. I think that's the best one for writing. So it's like, even on one job, it'd still be like, okay, I'm going to use Claude for that bit, and I'm going to use Gemini for that bit, and I'm going to use ChatGPT for that bit. It's like, it's only because I've done so much work in this area, I know when to go to which tool. But if you're juggling these 4 tools, and you're doing a piece of work, if you don't know what to use when, it probably take you even
And you've
longer.
got to pay a license.
So once you get to grips with it, it's brilliant.
And you've got a license as a brand.
You'd have to.
You don't want to put your stuff into open source, do you? You know, that's the other challenge, isn't it, as well? Like, what do you want as a brand that's going to be out there in open source? Trying to use it, but you don't necessarily want to give away your own IP. That's another ethical, legislative, copyright kind of minefield, isn't it? But yeah, so you're either in the paid for version or you're giving away something, because nothing's free, is it really?
But then you don't always have to put in an input to get an output. And if you do put an input in, you can put your own. You can use your own work rather than someone else's. But but then there's things like ChatGPT Enterprise where there's much more privacy in the things that you upload, and you can also create your own GPT on ChatGPT where you can input your data. So there's a lot more options, especially ChatGPT Enterprise. It's made specifically for companies that want to safeguard and have some privacy over their stuff, which I totally get. And I always say in my workshops, never put anything proprietary or confidential into any of these tools, especially if you're using the free version, at all, just unless you're using an enterprise version. So there's a whole load of things that we need to consider when we're inputting any kind of data into these tools. That's really important.
Yeah.
Kerry, could you just expand on that point, Kerry, where you said it doesn't matter in the connection between the input and the output, that you don't necessarily have to lose anything by putting in something because the output might.
Yeah, so sometimes you don't have to although often if you put in a piece of work, you get a better output. You can also just prompt it with nothing identifying. You could just outline in a really descriptive way what your tone of voice is, or you could describe your problem and talk about your target audience and what you need, and still get something that's valid. Especially and things like, I use it quite a lot for research. I don't need to enter anything. I can go onto Copilot and ask it to summarize a web page for me, or I can ask it to give me some insights on a web page. I've not given anything in exchange for that. I've just analyzed something, or I've summarized a large document. So if I've got something that's publicly available, a research paper, for example, then I can use that to help me to analyze it. It's not, I don't necessarily have to put in something. I might just use the tools to analyze something that's already on a web page. Or just good prompting without putting in any information.
I think what's coming through to me here is that you are a very skilled user, and that's what a lot of people maybe still struggle with, is how do I learn to use these tools? What's also coming through to me is this point we hear quite a lot, that AI won't take your job. It's the person who knows how to use an AI tool that will take your job. And I think, I'll ask you at the end of the podcast for some top tips for people to get started and how to improve their uses of the tools. But another related point just to mention is we've been hearing that within, say, marketing departments or people working with clients, the kind of more senior level people are relying on, say, a marketing executive or a social media executive to become the ChatGPT expert or to become the AI expert. So I think there's an opportunity for copywriters to, if they learn the tools the right way, they're really arming themselves with the ability to be, no, I know what I'm talking about. I know when to use the AI, when not to use the AI. And, I certainly see yourself there, Kerry, at that point. But there's an advantage to being able to say, I know how to use it properly and I know how to use it well. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally agree. And that's where I stand on all of this. And that's why I'm really interested in the education side of things. One, because I think it's really important people understand the pitfalls and the problems and the societal impacts of using these tools. But also because I think that if we use them well, that they're really helpful. So I think, for me, there is that line that you just quoted. It's like you won't lose your job, but you use it to someone who's using it well. And I think that's probably true, but it takes a while, but I think it's worth it. And I think you get quicker as well. So you know when to not even start with AI in the first place. And I know now from doing any research, I'll use I'll use Copilot and go onto a website and do a quick, summary. So, but all those things, I suppose, have just come over time. So I think it's a trial and error process. I think things like prompt writing, it's something that you learn over time. You have to, once you know the basic techniques, it will be like, okay, if I do this on this case, and eventually you'll go, okay, I know exactly what to say on with this prompt, and I know it's going to get a really good result for me. So I think it's time. But I also think there's also this kind of view that everyone's already using it, and that other agencies are doing it and copywriters are, and I just don't think that's true. I think there's this big people, and there's a lot of marketing which I really hate, this whole kind of like don't get left behind stuff, and I think that people are still very much just starting out. A lot of the courses that I run are complete beginner courses. It's just, here are the tools, this is what's available, here's some basic ways to use them. And I think a lot of people are being very cautious, and rightly so. So I also think we have to take all this kind of this stuff with a pinch of salt. And we don't, you're not behind. We're all still sorting out. And anyone who says they're an AI expert or guru, it's nonsense, because ChatGPT's been around for just over a year, really. So I think it's just a gradual process. But I do think stepping in, learning a bit about the tools, learning about the pitfalls and problems and issues, also really important. And then you can start seeing how it works for you. And it will work well for you on different jobs, and some jobs it won't work well for you at all. So and as soon as you know, then you can just go in straight and use it well. So that's what I think anyway.
Julie, how do you find yourself using the tools yourself at the moment?
So I use it a lot for research. So trying to, a bit like Kerry, like summarizing content and thinking about research. And I also use it a little bit for structuring. So if I'm writing a blog, or if I need even to write presentations, sometimes I'll put in, the kind of theme that I want to do, and I'll use it as a base level of structuring, but I don't use it for actually writing anything at all. So I think Kerry's right, there will be early adopters, but most people are trying it rather than using it on everything that they do. And I think from a leadership point of view, it worries me a little bit that the youngest person in the team becomes the expert on what's, you're really tech savvy, you do this. That really, really worries me, because I think that's what happened in a lot with social media for a while as well. And actually, these environments are quite hidden, sometimes what's going on. And if you haven't got a view at a leadership level about what your policy is, where you're going to use it and where you're not going to use it, and what the values and principles are that you want to uphold while you're doing these things, I think can be very, very sticky places that we can get ourselves into. And so I think, as organizations, we've got to be leaders within organizations have got to at least have some view of what's going on and have some oversight of the direction, even if it is being executed, at a lower level within the organization.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that as well. And sometimes it can be the other way around, where you talk to the creative directors, but actually people, across the organization need to understand the tools, because it might be that young people are using it without really telling anyone, or it's just part of what they do now. And actually it's quite important that they understand the pitfalls and the issues, and not to just randomly upload information or confidential reports and put it into ChatGPT. Everyone has to understand how to use it well across the board. Otherwise you're going to get into a pickle.
But I think that's a really good point.
I think it has become, something like you say, Kerry. I think, when we're anyone who works in marketing in particular needs to understand what that landscape is. They don't necessarily need to be using those tools every single day in their job. They do need to understand the way they're being used and what the rules are, so around transparency, around authenticity, around quality, all of those kind of things. What is it that we're able to do, and what do we need to be aware of?
I think having some kind of AI policy or some kind of standpoint is really important for organizations going forward. How they're gonna tackle it, how they're gonna use it, and that would be something that would be very visible. So when you were working with a brand, that they would have an AI policy. The tech brands have got really nice AI policies, so Microsoft is a good one. That's probably the sort of go-to one if ever anyone wants to look at that. But it could even just be at this point a standpoint or a few statements. I've got one on mine. It's just, I will never, because it just so that it's clear that where I stand on it. It doesn't have to be. The Microsoft one is very extensive, as you'd imagine. But yeah, I think a lot of people are working towards having policies now within their organization, because obviously it's not just content. Content is content, but there's much more serious, very things with a much bigger societal impact, depending on what your organization's doing. It could be horrific. So yeah, I think everyone needs to have some kind of policy or be very aware of how they're going to approach it, how they're going to use it, and how they're going to communicate with their clients.
I've got a question for you, Kerry, actually, if that's all right. Am I allowed to do that, Emma? Can I ask Kerry?
Of course you are. Yes, please.
I was going to ask you whether you've had brand guidelines being given to you now with AI. Are they included within brand guidelines that you're being given by clients to when you're asked to write things for them?
It's a good question. I haven't. No, I've not had anything like that yet.
Yeah.
I've been given brand guidelines to edit that are generated, and it was just, they were just so bad. I had to turn down the job. So someone gave me they were like, we've generated these brand guidelines with AI, can you just edit it? It was just like, it's just not going to, it just doesn't work, because there's so much depth in creating a tone of voice guide.
Yeah.
There's so much understanding and workshops that have gone on and strategy and like a really deep understanding of that brand. It's like, and so I saw it and it was just so shallow and so empty. And I just said, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't do this job. I'm sorry, this is just not for me. This is not the way that I would ever want to work with clients. So, yeah, wow. I've seen it in that kind, but I've not seen it built into guidelines. But I think it'd be really interesting to see that. And I wonder if that actually will be something that happens going forward, so that it's built into when you give a brand tone of voice or guidelines, that it's like, say I here, but don't use it here.
Yeah. And I just wonder, because I suppose it makes you think about that point you were making earlier about we're all still at the start of this journey. We're nowhere near, getting towards the end. It's not really mainstream or any of those kind of things, even though it's in the news all the time. Actually, in the day-to-day of what everyone's in their jobs, it's not as mainstream as we would think. And perhaps, the fact that I don't think I've seen any brand guidelines with it in yet. So, and you haven't, it's obviously not as prolific as you expect it to be there, wouldn't you? Once it's embedded in content creation.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Yeah, I've not seen that yet. It'd be interesting when I get the first one of those. Yeah, it does feel very prolific, and I do think the media definitely sort of creates this thing like everyone's doing, and a lot of agencies I feel like they feel quite pressured. They'll come to me and say, can you come and give us a talk on it, because we feel like everyone's doing it. But there are a lot of agencies at the moment who are just fact finding. So I did a talk recently for an agency who just wanted to tell me everything about AI copywriting, but they'd also had someone come in who was an IP lawyer who come in, and then they had someone who was amazing at like video creation and Mid-Journey, and they'd had that. So it was almost like they were getting all these sort of facts and figures in, so they could make an assessment of where they go next. Yeah. So I think a lot of agencies are that safe, but then there's also agencies who are like right into it. Especially on the visual side of things as well. They're already using Mid-Journey for stimulating ideas, creating mood boards, creating storyboards. I just think there's always early adopters that are all in and doing incredibly like really cool stuff with AI. But then there's also those that are just like, do you know what, we're not quite sure where we want to go yet, so we're just going to find out as much as we can, and then we'll take a step forward. So I guess that's just the way in any new technology.
Yeah. And, it is becoming clear that they're just going to the technology is going to get absorbed into the existing tools that you're already using, such as within Google and Microsoft and Adobe, whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah. So that it's more difficult, isn't it, then?
It's just part of it. Yeah, you can't
Yeah, it's like part of the
distinguish.
ecosystem. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you're not going to declare that you're using Grammarly. It's like
No.
if you're using Help Me Write in Google in your Gmail or in your Word documents, and it's a Help Me Write, there's a little flashing magic
Yeah.
wand to just make it
Yes.
shorter or make it longer. Like, do I have to tell my client I'm using Google
Yeah.
Help Me Write? It's in my like Google Word documents. Do I? So yeah, I think they will, and that's very much the way that Google and Microsoft are going, where all of this, the AI will be built into the tools that we use every day.
As this episode is going to be going out on International Women's Day, I think it's worth just looking at some of the issues about bias that's built into the LLMs, the learning models like ChatGPT. And I got a really interesting quote actually from a summit a few years ago, Fortune's Most Powerful Women Next Generation Summit. And Frida Poli quoted at that summit, "Can you imagine if all the toddlers in the world were raised by 20-year-old men? That's what our AI looks like right now. It's being built by a very homogenous group." Now, that was 2019. That's a good few years ago now. And ever since, things have multiplied to X, the X degree. But this is an issue that I think people are not fully aware of, which is the sort of, you're feeding, the language models are being fed what's already out there. And what's already out there has predominantly been written by a minority, or you could call a majority of white male background, which may have derogatory or propagating stereotypes against minorities, including women. So therefore, it's kind of, amplifying and reflecting what's already in that bias. So I might not be putting the question very well, but a simple example for people might be that, an AI image generator might think a doctor will always be represented as a man, a nurse might always be represented by a female. And the recent controversy over Gemini's new image generator, where they had to apologize for the bias that went the opposite direction, where historical figures were being represented in a non-realistic way. So just maybe talk a little bit, if you could, about the whole idea of the bias and the kind of minority representation issue that we're seeing just right now in AI, and what we maybe can do about it, how to stand up for women and minority representation.
I think the tools I think they're getting better. In terms of, especially the image generation tools, I've noticed Midjourney's a lot more, the results are much more diverse. And I do think there's definitely a thing around age, because if you type into Midjourney, say you want to generate an image of a woman, it will always be a young, attractive woman. So that's what, if you want someone older and more, even like in their 40s, not talking, they're really young. It just by default generates that. I think that's a bit of an issue, but I do think it's getting better. But I'm not working on it on a massive scale. I know there was a thing that I spoke about last, actually, International Women's Day. I went into an agency to do a talk on AI, and there was a big article in the Guardian around bias and about how often women's bodies were, I don't know if you saw that, but women's bodies were often, by the AI algorithms on social media, were often held back. So there's the model will decide whether or not to push something out and send it far, or whether it will actually suppress it. And anything with, sometimes it would be things like a pregnant woman, like an amazing woman's body, growing a new life, or things like breast examinations for things like breast cancer, that those would be classed by the AI as explicit content and therefore not pushed out. And the problem, obviously with that, was what someone who talked about it, who's an ethics person, was saying. The reason is that because the models tend to be trained by straight men, and as a result of that women's bodies are regarded as sexualized, even if it's a pregnant belly. I mean, it's just crazy. So
yeah,
I don't know how that's being rectified, but that's a situation of bias. And I do think some areas are getting better, but we're still going to have that. And the problem with AI is, like you said, that because it's trained, essentially large language models trained on the internet, the bias that we have there. It's just that's just going to be just expanded. So I think the models, I think they are trying. I know ChatGPT have been trying to like reduce the toxicity of their outputs, and I think they're much more on the ball. Saying about Gemini having to take down their image generation tool. I think it's definitely something out there, but I it's a big job to get rid of that bias. It's so inherent in the models, and because of what it's trained on.
Let me just jump in about that issue of the choosing image representations of women, for example. That's something that Meta has been dealing with for a long time, right? With with their content moderators and the automatic tools they have first, clamping down on images of breastfeeding or whatever it might be that are health related issues. So, you could argue that they couldn't even handle that when being dealt with by humans. Like, how on earth is an actual pure AI going to manage it? It's just that was never really resolved. I don't think you can protest to Facebook that this has been taken down in error, but you can't do that with an AI. Like it's a bit scary.
And I think
Julie, what do you think?
I think that your point there, Emma, and Kerry's as well, but it's all about the problem that we have, which is that this area of tech is still very male dominated. And until we change that, it's almost not a problem of ChatGPT. It's a societal problem, isn't it? In the fact that women aren't going into these industries. They're not leading the thinking that's going on in those areas. And although diversity is increasing, it's still got such a long way to go for that to really feed through. And I think last time I saw you, Emma, I was talking to you about Jeanette Winterson's book about AI, and she's obviously a real feminist author. And this book, 12 Bites, is all about the historical, cultural impact of AI through society. And actually, women were really involved in the tech and computer industry until the tech and computer industry became something where people were making loads of money. And then it suddenly became a male-dominated space, So I think we've almost got a societal, educational, not just like you're educating, Kerry, educating people who are professionals who want to be able to use these tools in their jobs. But we've got a problem about how we're making sure right through childhood we're educating women and people from diverse backgrounds to feel that there is a space for them in this tech industries and that they can shape the direction they go in, because it's not just about representation, it's about values, cultural values, all of those things as well. It's a huge challenge. And I agree with you, Emma. We haven't solved it with social media, and that's actually more manual, or has been more manual than this. So it doesn't feel great, does it, going in, really? But
no,
be a startup AI business that's run by women who will manage to kind of crack it. But when these organizations, Microsoft, Facebook, Meta, how do we? Governments aren't even able to sort of like crack them, are they? So I don't know how it's going to happen. It's hard.
Well, it's been quite interesting to see. One of the things we always look at the Digital Marketing Institute is the skills people need right now to work in marketing, and it's been encouraging how soft skills are becoming more to the fore again. Like the LinkedIn, I guess their last survey of 2023 was looking at how the soft skills are becoming potentially more important than the hard tech skills, because AI can take so much of that away from people, that what we still need is, communication skills, teamwork, persuasiveness, creativity, and that includes writing. So that to me is encouraging, that, that there could actually potentially be a bit of a balancing here, where dare I say, the more female side of things can rise up a little bit and be more prevalent, potentially.
I think those soft skills are really important. I think I mean, the whole creativity thing that we still do need to bring that to the table. And I still also don't believe that I can do a lot of really, really creative stuff. So I can see why that would be important. And actually just, connecting, communicating, these very like human skills are so important, if not more important, now that AI is here. And as outside of my AI world, I'm a yoga teacher and also host women's circles where I literally take women into the woods and we sit around a fire on a log and we journal with pens and paper and we talk and we do all this very, very human stuff. And I feel like there's almost a bigger desire for that now, because we are so caught up in the AI and the artificial. We don't really know what's real and what isn't real, to just go, I just need to sit on a log and talk to people. And I think AI for me has made me celebrate my humanity even more. Like what does it mean to be human? It's a question we have to ask ourselves now. And the fact that I even say the word human in a conversation, like it's actually got to the point now where I say human writer. It's like that. I mean, that's just like, wow, I have to actually specify. It's mad.
That's where we're at. Yeah. Another little quote I just took to finish off here from the Women's Day website. This year's theme is actually diversity, and they talk about diversity within the industry, within tech, within making sure women are represented. And I like the quote they had of, new technologies give us a chance to start afresh, starting with AI, but it's up to people, not the machines, to remove bias.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, great quote.
Good quote. Thank you, International Women's Day. So if we have 2 more minutes, if you guys would, each of you have perhaps 2, maybe 3 tips to help listeners today kind of get started with getting on top of these tools and understanding why they need to learn, say, ChatGPT, or just kind of how to get started, some top tips to take away from this conversation.
Should we go first, Julie?
Okay. So I would think really think about what your brand stands for, your values, and what relationships you're trying to create with the content that you are producing. And ultimately, I would think that's around, centers around trust. And so you need to have within your organization and within the way that you implement any of these tools some policies, some rules, some processes that think about that transparency and that and what you're going to stand for in the way that you use them. So I would think about, that's probably the most important thing that I would think about. And then secondly, I think it's very important to keep up to date with what's going on. So try and get some basic training, and maybe through your networks, try and keep up to date with how people are using these things, and use those networks to stay informed. Because I think what you don't want to do is just kind of look at it through your own kind of blinkered way. There's such a learning platform. There's so many things going on and so many new things happening all the time. You need to have access to that, to that sort of environment. And then third tip, I think definitely give it a go and have a play. I mean, I've got it on my phone and I use it for all sorts of stuff around the house, let alone what I'm using for, work point of view. And I think that is kind of interesting and fun and a little bit scary, but yeah, I would definitely just give it a go.
What kind of things around the house, Julie? I have to know now.
No, yeah. So any kind of instructions that come with a bit of flat pack or anything like that, I ask it how to do it. I ask it for things to go in my phone and go, I've got this, what can I make? Ask it to tell jokes, pick music, all sorts of stuff. It's great.
And Kerry, your tips?
Well, obviously the first one as an educator is, I'd say, do like Julie said, to try to really get your head around the tools and how they can help you. And and help you specifically with your work, because it's, there's so much information out there. I think it's important to, because AI is so big, because it covers so many different areas, I think it's quite important to really, what do you need it for in your job? So I think to learn the tools, to start playing around with them, see what they can do. Everything's an iterative process with these AI tools. It's all about trial and error. So I'd say getting on the board, but don't get stressed about, oh, we're so far behind. I just, starting now is great. I'd say also that to look below the surface of the tools that you play with. I think there's so much hype, especially around things like Sora being released, and you just see, obviously they release all these amazing demos and it looks amazing. It's going to radically change content creation, but actually to look under the surface, what does this mean? What are the implications? What are the problems? And to really be aware of those, things like hallucination, so making sure that you're fact checking your work. Though it sounds authoritative, it might not actually be true. So yes, there's so much excitement and there's so much potential, but we have to be aware of the implications and the problems underneath. So look underneath the surface. And my final one, which I always say every talk I ever do, is nurture your human creativity. Apply it wherever you can. To go and sit on a log with some other women, write with pen and paper, like really enjoy the creative process, because it's so human and so necessary and so good for our health. I just think it's so important that we still hold on to it and nurture it and love it, and just find the joy in it. AI is great, but it's not a patch on that.
Perfect. Perfect. I'm going to go sit in a log right now. Thank you. Thank you for that. Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for such an interesting conversation. There's so much we touched on there, and there's plenty more we didn't get to. Just to finish up, maybe you just each tell us where people can find you online. Julie, you go first.
So you can find me on my website, which is www.small-wonder.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn under Julie Atherton.
Yeah, I'm Kerry Harrison on LinkedIn. My website is kerryharrison.io. I've also got a newsletter called Minds and Machines, which is on Substack. So that's Minds and Machines News. That's on Substack, so you can see my latest newsletter on there as well.
We'll put links to all these in the show notes on the podcast page. Well, listen, thank you so much, ladies, if I can say that, and happy International Women's Day.
And to you, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Happy International Women's Day.
See you again. Thank you
for having me.
Bye.
Take care.